All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive on a really chilling story, the story of Rodney Alcala. He's also known as the dating game killer. Now, you might be thinking about that infamous game show appearance, but get this, it's not what you think. He didn't actually go on the date. More on that a little bit later. What makes this deep dive so special is the source material. We have a recent interview with Detective Craig Robison. Now, this is the man who cracked the case, and this is the first time he's ever spoken publicly about it. And let me tell you, his insights into Alcala's mind are unbelievable. So today, we're going to trace the steps to this investigation. We're going to uncover Alcala's truly disturbing past, and we're going to explore that close call on the dating game. And of course, our expert is here with us today to help connect the dots and analyze what we find. So one of the things that really stood out to me in the interview was Detective Robison saying that Alcala had a very high IQ, but he used it for all the wrong reasons. He even said Alcala would still be doing it if we didn't catch him.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how intelligence can be a double-edged sword. I mean, we often assume a high IQ leads to success, but in some cases it can be a tool for manipulation and deception. What I think is so intriguing is how Alcala's intelligence specifically played out in his crimes, for example. He often used photography as a way to lure victims, posing as a professional
Oh,
photographer.
that's so eerie. Using a seemingly innocent hobby as a mask, it really makes you wonder, how common is that tactic among serial killers?
Well, I can't give you exact statistics. The use of a cover or a way to gain a victim's trust is pretty common. I think about Ted Bundy. He often feigned injury to gain sympathy, so using photography. Not unique to Alcala, but it's definitely chilling how he exploited it.
Absolutely. Speaking of chilling, this actually ties into Alcala's dating game appearance. Now brace yourself for this. He actually never went on that date. Cheryl Bradshaw, the Bachelorette, found him creepy
Yeah.
and backed out. It's crazy. It's almost unbelievable that someone could sense danger like that. I mean, can you imagine being on a game show and having a gut feeling save you from a potential date with a serial killer?
It's definitely a remarkable story of intuition, but it brings up an interesting question. How reliable are gut feelings? Are there actual red flags that we can learn to recognize? Or is it more about trusting that inner voice when something just feels off?
I feel like we've all had those moments where we've ignored that inner voice and then regret it later. But in these really high-stakes situations, how do we learn to trust it? Especially when everything seems outwardly okay.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance. You don't want to be paranoid, but you also don't want to dismiss those feelings. One thing that I think is helpful is to be aware of common manipulation tactics. For example, if someone's pushing boundaries too quickly or trying to isolate you from others, those can be some serious warning signs.
Yeah, those are big red flags.
Sure.
So, okay, intuition may have saved Cheryl Bradshaw, but sadly, 12-year-old Robin Samsoe wasn't so lucky. Her disappearance in June of 1979 is what really kicked off Detective Robison's investigation. Initially, they thought she might be a runaway, but things took a sinister turn when they learned about a beach encounter that she and her friend Bridget had earlier that day. Now a man, who we now know was Alcala, approached them on the beach, and what's striking is he wasn't even in beachwear. He had an afro. He was carrying a camera and asked to take their pictures. Tragically, that was the last time Robin was seen alive.
Oh, wow. That camera detail is so significant. It really points to Alcala's methodical nature and possibly even a desire to document his crimes. This is sadly something that we see with some serial killers. It's almost like a compulsion to memorialize their actions.
That's a truly disturbing thought. So what happened next? Well, luckily, Bridget survived that encounter, and she was able to help the police. They created a sketch, and a tip line was set up. And believe it or not, it was a parole officer who recognized Alcala from the sketch and called it in. It was a pretty incredible breakthrough.
Wow, that's amazing. It really highlights how crucial parole officers are in the criminal justice system. They have such valuable firsthand knowledge of offenders and their behaviors and their potential to reoffend. Their input is so crucial, especially with repeat offenders.
And boy, did Alcala have a history. And remember, this was before widespread DNA technology. So investigators relied heavily on witness accounts and physical evidence, and what they uncovered painted a terrifying picture. So let's rewind. Way back to 1968, years before Robin's disappearance, a witness sees Alcala driving off with a young girl, follows them, and calls the police. They find 8-year-old Tali Shapiro in an apartment, brutally beaten with a steel bar and barely clinging to life. Alcala had fled, but was later caught. Now, this is where it gets really interesting and troubling.
Yeah, this case is particularly important because it occurred during a vastly different era in criminal justice. Sentencing guidelines were much more lenient back then, and the emphasis was often on rehabilitation, rather than simply keeping offenders off the streets.
So back then, the focus was more on trying to fix criminals
Yeah,
rather than just locking them up.
exactly. And in Alcala's case, he pled guilty to child molestation and only served 34 months before being paroled in 1974. It's shocking considering the brutality of his attack on Tala.
Only 34 months for such a horrific crime. That's mind-blowing. How have things changed since then?
Well, there's been a huge shift in the way we approach sentencing, particularly for violent crimes against children. Sentencing guidelines have become much stricter, and there's a greater focus on public safety and holding offenders accountable for their actions.
And unfortunately, that shift in thinking came too late to prevent more tragedies. Shortly after Alcala's release in '74, he was arrested again for giving marijuana to a 13-year-old girl. And then in 1977, he was arrested for the rape of a 15-year-old hitchhiker. What's crazy is that this particular victim's quick thinking might have saved her life. She actually managed to convince Alcala that she was enjoying their time together. And when he stopped for gas, she made a run for it and alerted the police.
Oh.
It's amazing how some people can stay so calm under pressure.
It really is a testament to the human will to survive. In situations where fighting back could escalate the danger, victims sometimes use these incredible psychological tactics to manipulate the situation, buy themselves time, and create an opportunity to escape.
It's fascinating and terrifying how both the victim and the perpetrator are engaged in this psychological battle.
Yeah.
But it also highlights the importance of empowering potential victims with strategies for self-protection.
Absolutely, because while the responsibility lies solely with the perpetrator, giving people the tools to recognize danger and react effectively can make a huge difference.
So, okay, Alcala is out on bail for that 1979 rape case when Robin Samsoe disappears. And here's where it gets even crazier. The way he was finally connected to her case is almost too strange to believe. And yes, it involves the dating game, but not in the way you might think. One of Detective Robison's partners is at home, reading the newspaper, when the dating game comes on TV. The host describes Bachelor number 1 as a photographer, charming, successful, and then introduces Rodney Alcala. And the detective instantly recognizes him as their prime suspect. Can you imagine?
Oh my gosh, talk about a bizarre twist of fate. It really makes you wonder how often these seemingly random events lead to major breakthroughs in investigations. It speaks to the importance of connecting the dots and paying attention to details that might seem insignificant at first.
And this seemingly insignificant detail, this dating game appearance, led to another pivotal moment. They brought Bridget back in, the girl who survived the beach encounter with Alcala, to watch the episode. And when she saw him on the screen, her reaction was immediate and visceral. She knew without a doubt that this was the man from the beach. Sadly, just a few weeks later, Robin's remains were found in a remote mountain area with Bridget's identification and the mounting evidence. Detective Robison arrested Alcala for Robin's murder in July of 1979. But the story doesn't end there. After Alcala's arrest, they searched a storage locker he had rented in Seattle. What they found inside was horrifying. Hundreds of photos of women, many in suggestive poses, and a bag filled with jewelry. One item in particular stood out, a small pouch containing rose-shaped earrings. Robin's mother later confirmed those earrings belonged to her daughter, but at the time, they didn't have the DNA technology to definitively link them.
That's truly chilling. The fact that he kept those photos and jewelry suggests that he saw them as trophies, a way to relive his crimes and hold on to a sense of power over his victims. It's a pattern we see with some serial killers.
Unfortunately.
So they have this mountain of evidence, but can't definitively connect it to Alcala yet.
Without DNA technology, they couldn't definitively tie him to those specific crimes.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to think about how much forensic science has advanced.
Yeah.
Back then, investigators were often working with limited tools and techniques. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with like half the pieces missing. Exactly. But as we know, technology marches on. And those advancements in DNA analysis would eventually come back to haunt Rodney Alcala. Decades passed. But those rose-shaped earrings found in Alcala's locker never left Detective Robison's mind. Then, in the early 2000s, DNA technology had advanced leaps and bounds. Investigators were able to re-examine evidence from cold cases, and Alcala's case was reopened. And guess what?
They got a hit.
They got a hit. DNA on those rose-shaped earrings matched Charlotte Lamb, who was murdered in Los Angeles back in 1978. It was the irrefutable link they needed, a direct connection between Alcala and another victim.
It's pretty remarkable. And think about the families of the victims waiting decades for answers. DNA technology has brought closure to so many families who thought they'd never see justice served.
It's amazing how a tiny piece of jewelry kept this like this twisted souvenir, became the key to unlocking more of Alcala's secrets. It really speaks to the power of forensic science and its ability to bring justice, even years after a crime has been committed.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, how many more cases are out there, just waiting for that one piece of evidence to connect the dots?
It's a bittersweet victory for sure. But that DNA evidence from Charlotte Lamb's case was just the beginning. Investigators started combing through cold cases, looking for any possible links to Alcala. And sadly, they found them. In 2010, Alcala was finally convicted of 5 murders in California, including Robin Samsoe's. But the story doesn't stop there. In 2013, he pled guilty to 2 more murders in New York. And in 2016, he was charged with yet another murder in Wyoming, this time a 28-year-old pregnant woman. The DNA evidence just kept piling up. It's unbelievable how much this one man's actions affected so many lives.
It's heartbreaking, and unfortunately, Alcala's case, as horrific as it is, fits into a pattern we see with some serial killers. They often have a long history of violence, with their crimes escalating over time.
Okay, but what drives someone to become a serial killer? Is there some kind of common thread that connects them, some psychological profile that can help investigators understand and stop them? The legacy of this case and the lessons that we can learn from it. What I think is interesting is that even though Alcala died in prison in 2021, his case continues to fascinate and horrify people. You know, there's this morbid curiosity about serial killers, and I think part of it is just trying to understand what makes them tick, how someone could be capable of such cruelty.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a natural human desire to try and make sense of the senseless, to find some kind of explanation for why someone would choose to inflict so much pain on others. And I think in Alcala's case, that search for answers is even more complicated. Because he was so intelligent and charismatic, he didn't fit the stereotypical image of a serial killer, which makes his crimes even more unsettling.
Yeah, it challenges our assumptions
Yeah.
about who we perceive as dangerous. I mean, we often think of serial killers as these shadowy figures lurking in the darkness. But Alcala was able to blend in, to charm his way into people's lives, and use that trust to his advantage. It's terrifying.
It really is. And it highlights the importance of awareness, of trusting our instincts, and of being cautious about who we let into our lives. It's a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that evil can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly charming individual.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I hope it's been informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep striving to make the world a better place. Don't forget to like and subscribe.